My ex-wife betrayed me, walked out on our children and me, and now she has the audacity to demand I financially support her new husband's child. I didn't just sit back. I took her to court, and the outcome crushed her. Back when I was 27, life was simple and steady. I had a stable job that paid well, hit the gym a few times a week, and spent weekends relaxing with my close circle of friends. I wasn't looking for anything complicated. I was content. Everything changed at a backyard barbecue my buddy Phil hosted one sunny weekend afternoon. That's where I first laid eyes on Brittany. She was across the lawn, laughing at something I couldn't hear, her smile lighting up her whole face. She looked like she stepped straight out of some high-end commercial. Hair catching the breeze just right, eyes shining, laughter effortless. I made a dumb joke about the burgers being so burnt they could double as hockey pucks, and to my surprise she actually laughed. At that moment I thought I was charming, smoother than I probably came off. 8 months later we were walking down the aisle. Looking back now, I get it. Hindsight really is 20/20. The beginning wasn't awful. It wasn't like sparks flying constantly, but it wasn't miserable either. We found our rhythm. We were learning to navigate life together. When she found out she was pregnant with our son Declan, I was ecstatic. No exaggeration. I was floating. I can still recall the first time I held him in my arms. He had her button nose and my eyes, all swaddled up like a tiny burrito from Chipotle, and I stood there fighting back tears. Nothing prepared me for that kind of love. Those first few months were intense. I'd work full-time, then come home and take over so Brittany could rest. There was one night that sticks out. Declan wouldn't stop crying. I must have walked endless laps around our living room for 3 hours straight, softly singing every tune I could think of. Finally he was knocked out, fast asleep against my chest. I didn't dare move. I just held him close, ignoring how sore my arms were, or the early morning shift ahead. It was one of those moments that felt right, like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But after a while, something started to shift in Brittany. She grew colder. It was subtle at first, then more obvious. She'd pick apart every little thing I did. I'd come home dead tired from pulling double shifts to cover the rising baby expenses, and she wouldn't even glance up from her phone. "You didn't fold the laundry right," she'd snap. "The baby's been crying all day and you just stroll in now? Must be nice to get a break." I'd be standing there, bones aching from 10 hours on my feet, wondering where the woman I married had gone. Still, I put in the effort, made her breakfast every morning before work, handled nighttime feedings, and tried to plan little date nights to reignite the spark. None of it seemed to matter. There was one night, Declan was about 3 months old. I went all out, got my mom to babysit, reserved a table at the restaurant where we had our first date, and even surprised her with a necklace she'd pointed out months earlier. I came home with flowers, excited to give us a rare evening to reconnect. She sighed like I'd just asked her to run a marathon barefoot. "I don't feel like going out," she said. "Can't we just order pizza?" I tried not to let it show, but I was crushed. I reminded her that my mom was already on the way, that it'd be good to have some time for just us. She rolled her eyes. "Fine, give me 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes turned into an hour of half-hearted prep while she stared at her phone. Dinner was painful. She barely spoke, too busy texting. When I handed her the necklace, she muttered a flat, "Thanks," like I'd handed her a receipt. She wanted to head home before dessert. I remember the ride back. Complete silence. That little jewelry box felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my pocket. I started to wonder if this was just a temporary funk, or if we were already past saving. Right around Declan's first birthday, she got pregnant again. That's when things really spiraled. Her phone was always buzzing. If I entered the room, she'd immediately turn it face down. Suspicion doesn't even begin to cover it. I asked her once who she was texting all the time. "What? I can't have friends now," she snapped. "You're being paranoid, so controlling." But I wasn't being paranoid. I could feel it in my gut. Something was very wrong. One night, I woke up to check on Declan and saw her curled up with her phone in the dark at 2 a.m., scream lighting up her face. I didn't say anything, just quietly started paying more attention. She took the phone everywhere, bathroom, outside, during meals. After our daughter Zara was born, things got worse. One evening while she was showering, her phone lit up, a message from someone named Jason. "I miss talking to you too." My heart dropped. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't vague. This was emotional cheating at minimum. I didn't confront her right away. I watched, observed. She drifted further away, barely present, always icy. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. One night after the kids were asleep, I told her straight up, "Something's not right. We barely talk. We don't even feel like a couple anymore." She didn't flinch. "I'm exhausted," she said. "I pushed out 2 kids in 2 years. Excuse me for not wanting to play house." "This isn't about pretending," I replied. "It's about respect, about being partners." She scoffed. "Maybe you should have thought about that before getting me pregnant again." That broke something in me. We had both wanted Zara. That wasn't just on me. But there was no point arguing anymore. I nodded. "Whatever. I'm going to bed." And with that, I stopped fighting for something that clearly didn't exist anymore. But I stayed consistent for the kids. I did the drop-offs, changed the diapers, and paid the bills. She was just a housemaid at that point, cold, distant, detached. But you know what? The silence was easier than the constant criticism and apathy. I didn't miss the arguing, I just missed the version of her that used to smile at my dumb jokes and get excited about late-night takeout. Just 4 months after Zara arrived, I came home after a long, draining shift at work and saw something that stopped me cold. Divorce papers sitting plain as day on the kitchen table. No warning, no conversation, not even a hint that she was planning something this final. She stood there, arms crossed, delivering her verdict like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "I'm done. I deserve better than this," she said, her tone dry, her face unreadable. "You're cold. You're never present." Like I was the villain in some twisted version of our marriage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag out my phone and show her all the times I reached out, all the love I tried to give her that went ignored. 57 texts. 57. Left unread or ignored entirely over the last month alone. Messages asking if she was okay, if she wanted to talk, if we could figure things out together. I wanted to remind her, who changed diapers at 3 a.m., while she groaned that she was too exhausted. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw accusations. Because right there, sitting innocently on the carpet surrounded by blocks, was Declan, barely 2 years old. Zara, tiny and peaceful, rocked gently in her swing nearby. The sight of them made the fury dissolve into something heavier. Grief. A nasty, hostile divorce would only hurt them. They were the true innocents in this whole mess. That moment, that exact scene in our kitchen, is seared into my memory like a scar. I.e., standing under the harsh light, gripping divorce papers that represented the collapse of everything I thought I was building. Declan, humming to himself, Zara sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the emotional avalanche barreling through the house. And I, already hollowed out emotionally. The truth, I had been checked out for a while. She had pushed me so far away, I barely recognized what we had anymore. Still, I looked her in the eyes and asked the question I'd been swallowing for months. "So, is this about Jason?" She didn't even blink. "This isn't about anyone else. It's about us not working." She didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. Whatever had started with Jason had run its course or shifted into secrecy, but her silence was louder than any answer she could have given. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "I want a clean split, 50-50, custody, property, everything, no child support. We both earn well enough." I could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. She might have expected a fight, but there was no fight left in me, only the will to protect my children from the wreckage of 2 adults who failed each other. The day I signed those documents felt like cutting out a piece of my soul and handing it away. I packed what little I could into my car and found a modest apartment nearby so I could be close to Declan and Zara. That first night, I sat on the floor. No furniture yet, just a mattress on the ground and a cheap TV sitting on a milk crate. The silence was suffocating. I stared at photos of my kids on my phone until the battery died. Then I just sat there, in the dark, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly, from family dinners to this, an empty room and an aching heart. Those first weeks as a single dad, brutal. I missed my kids desperately when they weren't with me, and when they were, I felt overwhelmed. Managing a toddler and an infant solo felt like trying to juggle fire while blindfolded. One night, Zara spiked a fever. I panicked and called my mom at 2 a.m., stammering through the details. She calmed me down, told me it was normal, just a mild fever. I stayed up the whole night watching her chest rise and fall, making sure she kept breathing. By sunrise, she was giggling again, and I realized I could do this. I would do this. The early custody handoffs were awkward and stiff. We'd meet in the Starbucks parking lot, barely making eye contact. Diaper bags were exchanged like diplomatic briefcases. Declan would cling to my leg, tears in his eyes as he begged not to go. That kind of heartbreak? There's no preparing for it. Zara, still too small to understand, would just blink up at me from her car seat. But Declan, he felt it. One day, out of the blue, he looked up at me with a furrowed brow and asked, "Why don't you live with us anymore, Daddy?" I froze. How do you explain something so heavy to a 2-year-old? I knelt down, heart racing. Mommy and Daddy love you very much, I told him gently. We just realized we can be better parents when we live in different houses. He thought about it for a second, then asked, So, do I get 2 rooms now? I laughed softly, wiping my eyes. Yeah, bud. You get 2 rooms. A year after the divorce was finalized, Brittany introduced someone new. Derek. Not Jason, oddly enough. Derek was a surprise. He worked part-time in marketing, meaning, from what I gathered, he barely clocked 20 hours a week. Brittany seemed to carry most of the financial weight. But they tied the knot when Declan turned 4 and Zara was just shy of 2. Just like that, my kids gained a stepdad. And a stepsister, Lyra, who was around Declan's age. Then came another baby, Nathan, who's now 7. The first time I met Derek was at a preschool drop-off. I was helping Declan hang his backpack when this guy, dressed like a time traveler from 2008 in an Ed Hardy shirt, walked up next to Brittany. You must be the ex, he said, stretching out his hand like we were old pals. His grin oozed smugness. I'm Derek. Heard a lot about you. I gave his hand the briefest shake. Wish I could say the same. He laughed too loudly, clearly trying to play the cool guy. Well, the kids seem great. Declan's been teaching Lyra how to build Lego castles. They're like best buddies already. There was something in his tone, something possessive, like he already considered Declan his. My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile. Declan's always been good at sharing, I said, gently tousling my son's hair. The first time I dropped the kids at their new place post-wedding, I noticed a wooden plaque on their front door. The Johnsonellis blended family, painted in cheerful colors. Every name was listed, except mine. No sign of my last name, even though it's the one both my kids were born with. I said nothing. That wasn't a hill worth dying on. The real gut punch came a few weeks later, during dinner. Declan, mid-bite, looked up and said, casually, Daddy Derek's teaching me how to ride a bike. I nearly choked on my slice of pizza. Daddy Derek? Mom's husband, he replied, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He said I can call him Daddy Derek, since he's like my other dad now. I had to step out onto the balcony to catch my breath. The anger, the heartbreak, the helplessness. It all hit at once. But I couldn't let it show. I walked back inside, kept my voice steady. Hey, buddy, I said gently, you already have a dad. Me. Maybe it'd be easier if you just called him Derek, so things don't get confusing. Declan just shrugged and went back to eating. Kids are resilient like that. Mom says I have to call him Daddy Derek because it's the respectful thing to do. That one sentence from Declan knocked the air out of me. I had just picked him up from their house and he was talking casually, like it was nothing. But it wasn't anything. Not to me. That night, once the kids were asleep, I texted Brittany. Hey, can we talk about this Daddy Derek thing? It's making me really uncomfortable. I tried to keep it respectful, just a parent trying to co-parent. An hour later, her response came in like a slap. It was Declan's idea. Don't make this a big deal. I knew that was a lie. At least, not the full truth. But what was I supposed to do? Should I correct my son every time he uses the name? Tell him what he could or couldn't call someone he saw as part of his daily life? That would only confuse him more. So, I swallowed my frustration, again, for his sake. Meanwhile, I worked harder than I ever had. My life became singular in purpose, giving Declan and Zara everything they needed. I took on extra hours, stayed late, and built a reputation that earned me 2 promotions in 3 years. Every bonus, every bit of overtime I saved. Eventually, I bought a small but warm home in a neighborhood with great schools and parks, not flashy but full of love. And then, there was Derek. This guy, who breezed into our lives with his part-time job and full-time arrogance, started making little digs at me in public. Always subtle enough to seem harmless. Always irritating enough to light a fire under my skin. At a parent-teacher night, we were standing by the science fair table. Declan had built this awesome robotic arm that could sort marbles by color. I was proud. Derek sauntered over. Hey man, how's the new car? Must be nice having that much spare cash when you're only responsible for 2 kids. I stared at him. I drove a 5-year-old Honda I bought used. It gets me where I need to go, I replied, tight-lipped. He smirked, gesturing at his designer watch, probably worth more than my monthly mortgage. Some of us understand what sacrifice means when you're raising 4 kids. I just walked away, not because I couldn't fire back, but because Declan was watching. It didn't stop there. Every school event, field trip, or birthday party became a stage for Derek's humble brags. During one field trip to the zoo, he volunteered as a chaperone too. 6 hours straight of him loudly talking about their upcoming vacation to Hawaii, the gaming console he bought for all our kids, and how rewarding but exhausting it is raising a blended family. He kept calling Declan and Zara our kids when talking to the other parents. Every time I heard it, my blood boiled. At lunch, he sat across from me while the kids played nearby. "You know, the kids really struggle with all the back and forth," he said, biting into some fancy organic sandwich. "Brittany and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if they had one stable home base, just visit you on weekends." I nearly choked on my water. "Excuse me?" He raised his hands like he was some wise mediator. "Just thinking about what's best for the kids, no offense." I stared at him. "My custody agreement isn't up for discussion. Especially not with you." He shrugged. "Just something to think about. Brittany says you've always put the kids first, so..." It took everything in me not to flip the table. Instead, I walked away and joined Declan and Zara by the jungle gym, where they were laughing and climbing like nothing in the world could touch them. Struggling, these kids looked more secure than ever. What a joke. But things didn't stop at passive-aggressive remarks and unsolicited parenting advice. No. Brittany began expecting me to treat her other kids, the ones she had with Derek, as if they were mine. It started small. Birthdays. "Don't you think it's rude to bring gifts just for Declan and Zara when Lyra is standing right there?" she texted one day. "You make her feel excluded." Lyra wasn't my child. I didn't have any kind of relationship with her beyond being her step-sibling's dad, but I gave in and started bringing token gifts. Then came the real push. "It's confusing when you only take 2 of them," she insisted. "They're siblings now. You're making Lyra feel left out." I tried to be diplomatic. "Look, I'm happy the kids are close, but my time with Declan and Zara is limited. I need to make the most of it." She wasn't having it. Wow, way to reject a little girl, real mature. The guilt trips kept coming, week after weekend. I stood firm on my boundaries, but somehow, I was always the bad guy. The villain is in her new picture-perfect family story. Then there were the Disney trips, the ski vacations, the fancy dinners. "Dad Derek took us to a cabin. Dad Derek got us all iPads." That's what I'd hear from the back seat after pickups. I didn't mind that they had fun. What burned was that I was expected to match it, and that I was being painted as the guy who only showed up when it was convenient. One particular weekend, Declan was unusually quiet during the drive. I glanced in the mirror. "You all right, bud?" After a moment, he said softly, "I heard Mom and Derek talking last night." My stomach dropped. "What did they say?" He looked out the window. "Derek said you're selfish, that you don't really care about our whole family, just about looking like the fun dad." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "That's not true, Declan. I love you and Zara more than anything." He didn't look at me, but he whispered, "I know." He told me he had told his mom it was mean. She scolded him for eavesdropping and told him not to repeat private conversations. I pulled over, shaking from the rage. I turned around to face him. "Declan, listen to me. I never want you to feel caught in the middle. If you ever hear something that upsets you, even if it's about me, I want you to talk to me, okay? No secrets. Ever." He nodded, and I could see it. The relief washing over him like a heavy weight was lifted. It broke my heart that he even needed to carry that kind of emotional load at his age. I never badmouthed Brittany or Derek in front of the kids. Not once. No matter what was said about me, I kept it away from them. They didn't need to carry adult baggage. But deep down, the narrative they were weaving, that I wasn't part of their real family, ate at me. And as the kids grew older, that narrative started coming with price tags. Brittany's financial demands suddenly weren't about Declan or Zara anymore. They were about her new family unit, and I was expected to chip in. When Declan and Zara were 7 and 5, something became very clear. They were exceptional. Not just smart, but gifted. Their curiosity was endless, their questions thoughtful, and their hunger to learn reminded me why I worked so hard in the first place. I started doing research and came across Westridge Academy, a top-tier private school that focused heavily on STEM education. The curriculum was cutting-edge, and their alumni were inventors, engineers, and even Ivy League scholarship recipients. The cost, though, was no joke. $12,000, 0 cents per child, per year. But when I saw the kind of education they'd receive, I knew it was worth every cent. I decided I'd find a way to afford it. I didn't hesitate. I brought it up during our regular co-parenting meeting with Brittany, thinking she'd be thrilled by the opportunity. I laid it all out. I found this school, Westridge Academy. It's an elite STEM-focused program. I'll cover 100% of the tuition for both Declan and Zara. They won't have to pay a dime. It's all on me. Instead of being excited, her face twisted into a frown. She folded her arms and sighed, like I had just insulted her. "What about Lyra?" she snapped. "It wouldn't be fair if she couldn't go too. You're dividing the kids." I blinked. "I'm offering to pay for our kids. Lyra isn't my responsibility." "She's their sister," Brittany insisted. "What kind of message are you sending if she's the only one left behind? You're creating division." I stood firm. "I'm giving our children an amazing opportunity. If you want Lyra to attend, that's on you and Derek." She was furious. But a few months later they still enrolled Lyra. Turns out Derek's parents footed the bill. So much for being unfair. But that wasn't the end of it. Every meaningful investment I made in Declan and Zara, whether school, extracurriculars, or even birthday gifts, sparked another round of guilt-tripping and emotional blackmail. I was expected to match everything I gave them for Lyra or Nathan too, as if treating all 4 kids identically was my obligation. But it was last spring, when the pressure really reached a boiling point. Declan and Zara were both accepted into Tech Future, an insanely competitive elite summer tech camp in Colorado. It's the kind of program kids dream of, only 40 spots nationwide, and both my kids earned places. Declan at 9 was already coding his own Minecraft mods from scratch. He even submitted an entire level he built himself as part of the application. Zara, she engineered a robot that could sort trash and recyclables, and won a state-level robotics competition with it. I was bursting with pride. The application process was intense. I watched them pour themselves into it, staying up late, building projects, writing essays. We worked side by side at my kitchen table for weeks. I'll never forget the night we submitted their applications. Declan hovered nervously over the submit button, double-checking every comma. Zara was vibrating with excitement, rewatching her demo videos. "What if we don't get in, Dad?" Declan asked. "Then we try again next year," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "But honestly, I think you've got this." When the acceptance emails came in a month later, it was chaos. I let them check the inbox after dinner, and the second they saw "congratulations," the room exploded. Zara did a full-on victory dance across the couch. Declan read the email aloud 3 times, just to be sure. We celebrated with ice cream and a promise. I'd buy them both brand new laptops for camp. The program cost just under $8,000, 0 cents per kid, plus airfare and equipment, nearly $20,000, 0 cents, all in. I didn't blink. I'd been saving for this kind of moment since the divorce. I drove a car with over 150,000 miles on it, skipped vacations, clipped coupons, and passed on upgrading my apartment all so I could give them opportunities that mattered. I made it so easy for them to escape, made them unhappy, made them empty and wasted. At our next co-parenting meeting, I told Brittany the big news. I expected at least a flicker of joy, maybe a "that's incredible." Instead, I got calculation. Her eyes narrowed. "Lyra's really into robotics too," she said, sidestepping the entire celebration. I felt the tension coil in my chest. "Yeah, I figured this was coming," I replied, calm but cautious. "I just think it would be so great for all 3 of them to experience this together," she continued, sipping her overpriced latte. "This isn't a vacation, Brittany," I said slowly. "It's a merit-based national program. Declan and Zara earned their spots." She leaned forward, lowering her voice as if she were about to drop some life-altering secret. "There's got to be a way to get Lyra in, too. You're already paying for the other 2. What's one more?" I actually laughed. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. "You want me to pay nearly $8,000, 0 cents, for your husband's child to attend a camp she wasn't even accepted into?" I clarified. "They're siblings. You're causing damage by creating inequality." "No, Brittany, what's damaging is teaching kids they're entitled to something just because someone else worked for it, that they don't have to earn it. This camp is a reward for effort. It's not a charity." Her expression turned icy. "So that's it? You don't care about how this affects their bond with Lyra? They're going to resent each other because of you?" "They'll resent you if you keep trying to drag them down just to make things equal. Let them shine. They earned it." She stood, grabbing her purse like she was about to deliver a closing argument. "Don't be shocked if they say they don't want to go unless Lyra can. Are you threatening to manipulate our kids into giving up something they earned?" She smiled coldly. "I'm just saying families support each other. Maybe you forgot what that looks like." I walked out of that cafe with my hands clenched so tightly I left crescent-shaped marks on my palms. Not from fear, from the raw effort it took not to overturn the damn table. The audacity. 2 days later, Declan called me in tears. "Mom says we shouldn't go if Lyra can't," he said, voice cracking. Classic Brittany move, guilt-tripping a child to get her way. "Buddy," I said gently, "you and Zara earned this. You worked your butts off. You deserve to go." "I still want to," he whispered. "I just needed to hear that." "Always," I said. "I'll back you every time." After we hung up, I texted Brittany. "Stop dragging the kids into this. Let them enjoy what they earned." Her reply, a thumbs down emoji. Really mature. But of course, Brittany wasn't done. Just 2 days later, I was in the middle of presenting a proposal at work, something I'd spent weeks preparing for, when I got a text from Derek. "We need to discuss your contribution to the family housing situation." I nearly choked on my coffee. Was this real life? What contribution? What family housing situation? I stared at the message, dumbfounded. I put my phone down and ignored it. There was no way I was opening that can of worms right then. I figured Brittany's latest stunt was just a flex, one of those weird power moves that fizzles out after a few days. But I was wrong. That Friday when I pulled up to pick up the kids like I always did, she handed me a manila folder with a deadpan expression. Inside was a printed spreadsheet and a typed letter, like we were stuck in some 90s office drama. While Declan and Zara grabbed their overnight bags, I skimmed the papers. The spreadsheet was detailed. Too detailed. Highlighted was a breakdown of their $2,400.00 monthly rent, with one neat row labeled 50% equals $1,200.00. The accompanying letter was even more absurd. Brittany was formally requesting that I cover half of their household rent. Her reasoning? My nicer neighborhood was causing an environmental imbalance for the children. According to her, the contrast between my home and theirs was creating emotional stress and feelings of inequality. I stared at the sheet, stunned. "Brittany," I said calmly, "my home, my finances, and how I choose to provide for the kids during my time with them is none of your business. You don't get to dictate my life." She crossed her arms and gave me the same tired, condescending look. "This isn't about you. It's about the kids' well-being. Don't you care if they feel divided?" I almost laughed. I've sacrificed everything to build stability for them. Work, personal life, comfort. I've done everything I can to give them the best. That's when Derek stepped out like some low-budget bodyguard trying to add weight to the situation. He actually said, with a straight face, a real man would support the entire household, not just cherry-pick the parts he likes. I felt my chest tighten. My ears were hot. The sheer gall of this guy, standing there in designer sneakers, living in a house I helped fund through child support and school expenses, trying to lecture me about manhood. I stepped closer, eyes locked. "You know what a real man does, Derek. He pays his own bills. He doesn't rely on his wife's ex-husband to subsidize his lifestyle." His face flushed. "Watch it, man. The kids are nearby." "Then maybe don't ambush me during pickup," I shot back. "And for the record, a real man doesn't use children to pressure someone for money." Brittany stepped between us. "This isn't extortion. This is co-parenting. But clearly you only care about yourself." I let out a real laugh, dry and sharp. "Co-parenting doesn't mean I pay your rent, Brittany. It means I take care of Declan and Zara. Not your other kids. Not Derek's daughter. Not your new baby. My children." Without another word, I called the kids to the car. As I backed out, I caught a glimpse of the two of them standing in the doorway, arms folded, clearly pissed their little presentation hadn't worked. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my fingers went numb. "Dad, are you okay?" Zara asked quietly from the back seat. I forced a smile and adjusted the mirror to look at her. "Yeah, kiddo. Just thinking about what movie we should watch tonight." Later that evening, after the kids were tucked in and the house was finally quiet, I sat on the back porch with a beer, trying to make sense of everything. Was I wrong? Was I being unreasonable? I called my buddy Phil, who'd been through a similarly messy divorce. "Tell me the truth, man. Am I being the bad guy here? Should I be helping them more financially?" Phil didn't even hesitate. "No, you're responsible for your kids. That's it. Their school, health stuff, and daily needs. That's your job. Their rent, their bills, their lifestyle. That's on them." "But what if the kids are feeling the difference?" I asked. "What if they feel like I'm giving them more and it's messing them up?" "Are your kids lacking anything over there?" he asked. "Do they have food, clothes, their own beds?" "Of course," I said. then they're fine. Kids don't care about fancy neighborhoods or big houses. They care about being safe and loved. Don't let them twist your sense of duty into guilt. You're not their wallet. He was right, of course. But the manipulation was constant, so relentless, that I started second-guessing everything. Was I just being proud? Was I hurting my kids by not buying into this blended family fantasy? That night, I stayed up late, pacing the hallway. Then it hit me. Having boundaries doesn't make me a bad parent. It makes me a healthy one. What I didn't know then was that the rent stunt was just the prelude. A week later, I showed up for what I thought was a normal parent-teacher conference. Coffee in hand, I was ready to talk about grades, science projects, maybe even summer reading lists. Instead, I walked into what looked like a staged intervention. Brittany and Derek were already seated in the counselor's office, flanked by the school guidance counselor. All three of them looked deadly serious. "Mr. Ellis, thanks for coming," the counselor began. "There are a few concerns we wanted to address." And I blinked. Concerns? Britton leaned forward, her expression sorrowful, almost theatrical. "We're worried about the inconsistency in parenting. The kids are struggling emotionally because of the split environments." "What does that even mean?" I asked. Derek chimed in, flipping through photos on his phone like he was presenting evidence to a jury. "Look at this. San Diego vacation. All 4 kids are smiling. It's real unity. But then, when he takes just Declan and Zara out, it causes division. They feel isolated." I was stunned, speechless. My hands clenched. Brittany put on her performance face, even dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Declan told me he cried because Lyra couldn't go to camp. He felt guilty. This kind of separation is hurting him." That was a lie. Declan had been buzzing with excitement about camp, counting down the days on a whiteboard in his room. But before I could respond, Derek piled on again. "Zara's been acting out. She's feeling left out. You treat her differently from her siblings." The same guy who barely knows her bedtime routine was now claiming insight into her emotional state. I took a breath, then said clearly, "Zara doesn't have siblings at my house. She has a brother, Declan. That's the reality. That's what you agreed to when we signed the custody agreement." Brittany scoffed. "You refuse to acknowledge the truth. They live in a blended family now. That's their reality." "No," I said. "Their reality is 2 homes, 2 sets of rules, 2 structures. That's what you wanted. That's what we've built." Then Derek leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're just threatened. They have a complete family with us, and you can't handle it. But taking it out on the kids is low." I stared him down, calm but seething. "A complete family? You mean the one where you told my son you're stuck with him?" His smirk faded instantly. "Oh, you mean the family where my daughter gets guilt-tripped for being accepted into a program she earned through her own hard work?" I asked, my voice steady, cutting through the room like a blade. "That's your definition of complete?" Brittany's eyes widened in mock horror, gasping like I'd just insulted her entire lineage. But I didn't let her derail the moment. "Save it," I snapped. "I've seen the texts. I've heard what the kids come home saying. This isn't about emotional health or what's best for anyone. It's about control. You want to control the story and my bank account?" They kept running the same tired routine, circling back to emotional narratives, playing the wounded, selfless co-parents, just trying to maintain a harmonious blended family. But when I refused to play along, Brittany dropped the act altogether. "If you can't see how your behavior is damaging, then maybe we need to revisit custody," she said coldly. I blinked. "What did you just say?" Derek leaned in like he was delivering bad news in a boardroom. "We're prepared to pursue primary custody on grounds of emotional neglect." The room froze. My heart felt like it had stopped mid-beat. A cold, weightless chill ran through my chest. They were threatening to take my children from me. All because I refused to fund Lyra's summer camp. All because I wouldn't pay half their rent. I sat back, took a breath, and responded with more calm than I felt. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said. "I have never neglected my children, not for a second. I've been present for every birthday, every doctor's appointment, every school project and scraped knee. I've sacrificed my time, my money, my comfort, and my career for them. If you want to accuse me of emotional neglect, you'd better bring something stronger than the fact that I'm not funding your husband's daughter's vacation." Brittany gave a smug little smirk. "We have more than enough documentation to show your unwillingness to support a healthy blended family dynamic. The courts care about that now." Something snapped inside me. Not the angry, explosive kind of snap, but the kind that brings total clarity. The kind where the fog lifts and you finally see everything for what it is. For years, I'd tried to keep the peace. I'd bitten my tongue so many times I'd lost count. And what had it earned me? Threats, manipulation. Now, an attempt to steal my kids under the pretense of being the better blended family. I stood up, calm but resolute, gathered my coat, met Brittany's eyes. "This conversation is over," I said. "Any future communication about custody will go through my attorney." And I walked out. I got to my car, sat behind the wheel, and just sat there. My hands were trembling. They had just threatened to take my kids. I felt panic, rage, and oddly, relief. Because the games were done. The masks had come off. Now I had clarity, and I knew exactly what needed to be done. From that parking lot, I made 2 calls. First, to the best family law attorney in this city. Second, to my buddy Fee, an old college friend who now works in digital forensics. For the next 30 days, I went into full stealth mode. Outwardly, everything looked the same. I followed the custody schedule to the letter. I smiled politely at drop-offs, nodded through Brittany's passive-aggressive texts, and didn't take any bait. But behind the scenes, I was building a legal fortress. Phil helped me recover every deleted text between me and Brittany from the past 3 years. Manipulative messages, financial pressure, guilt trips, thinly veiled threats, all documented. I compiled every financial record. Tuition payments, healthcare costs, extracurricular fees, receipts for clothing and food. I had everything categorized and time-stamped. Since I lived in a single-party consent state, I began recording every interaction at pickups and drop-offs. I installed a dashcam in my car that captured audio and video of every conversation. I had my attorney gather affidavits from teachers, coaches, and even our pediatrician, all testifying to my presence and involvement in Declan and Zara's lives. One particular moment stuck with me. I was at Declan's regional coding competition, sitting quietly in the audience. I spotted Brittany and Derek across the room. They didn't see me. I watched as Derek repeatedly checked his watch, clearly uninterested. When Declan finally went up to present, he barely looked up. As soon as the presentation ended, Derek stood up and headed for the exit. Brittany stayed to clap, but even that felt performative. I recorded it all. The dashcam caught gems like Derek saying, "Your dad doesn't understand how families work," and Brittany chirping, "Maybe Santa will convince your dad to stop being so selfish about the camp." When I handed the entire stack to my lawyer, she didn't even flinch. She flipped through everything like she'd been waiting her entire career for a case this solid. Her confidence needed no words, just the way she moved. Deliberate, assured. I knew we were about to bury them. Every night, after the kids went to bed, I worked. I cataloged texts, labeled files, and noted dates and context. Some nights I stayed up until 3 a.m., despite needing to be up for work at 6. I lived on caffeine and sheer willpower. But I didn't care. I had one mission: protect my bond with my children. Sure, there were moments of doubt. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, second-guessing everything. Was I overreacting? Would this legal war hurt the kids more than help them? But then I'd remind myself, I didn't start this. They threatened me. They threatened my children's home, their stability, and their emotional foundation. There's no coming back from that. And Brittany, thinking she had the upper hand, grew bolder. She sent me an official-looking email demanding I pay $8,500, 0 cents, for Lyra to attend a comparable STEM program to ensure things remained equitable. Straight to the evidence folder. Next, she began CCing her sister and mother on our custody emails. Suddenly, I was being lectured by a chorus of voices about being a real parent and supporting the whole family. They used the reply all like a battering ram of shame. My favorite email came from her mother, who actually wrote, "It's disgraceful that you continue to treat Lyra like a stranger. That poor girl just wants to be loved. You're emotionally damaging all the children." I didn't respond. Not to that one. Not to any of them. But I didn't need to. Because I had the truth, and soon they were going to see exactly what that looked like: documented, organized, bulletproof. A real father figure would want all the children to have the same opportunities. Shame on you. That was the last line of an email Brittany's mother sent me, capping off yet another group thread, filled with judgment, shame tactics, and self-righteous lecturing. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded the message, along with the others, straight to my lawyer without comment. But the real breaking point came shortly after that. Late one night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Declan. "Dad, can I come over tomorrow instead of Friday? Mom and Derek are fighting again about money." I felt my stomach tighten. Then came the second part of the message, and it was like taking a sledgehammer to the chest. "Derek said you should man up and help them since they're stuck with your kids half the time." Stuck with my kids, like they were unwanted luggage, an obligation, a burden. I sat in silence, rereading the words. I screenshotted the message even though it hurt like hell to do it. Using my own son's text as evidence felt cold and unnatural, but I needed to protect him, and this moment mattered. The next day, I picked Declan up early. He climbed into the car quietly, buckled up, and stared out the window for a moment before finally speaking. Derek said you only have a nicer house because you don't support a real family, and that you made Lero cry because you wouldn't pay for her camp. My grip tightened on the wheel. Does that kind of stuff bother you? I asked, gently. He nodded, eyes still on the passing streets. It makes me feel like we're the problem, but I know we're not. That was it. That was the last straw. I filed immediately for a revised custody agreement, 70/30 custody in my favor, along with strict communication guidelines and an order that all contact go through a court-monitored parenting app. No more free-form texting. No more ambushes. Just documented, accountable communication. When the papers were served, my phone practically exploded. Missed calls, angry texts. Even Brittany's mom weighed in again, as if I owed them an explanation for daring to protect my children. I didn't respond to any of it. 2 days later, Brittany cornered me during a pickup. Is this about the camp? She asked, arms folded like she was the injured party. I looked her dead in the eye. No, this is about you and Derek, using our kids as leverage, because I wouldn't fund your lifestyle. She blinked rapidly, trying to come up with a response. Don't know what you're talking about. Save it for the judge, I said, already walking away. From now on, talk to my lawyer or use the app. About a week later, Derek tried to confront me in the school parking lot. He walked up, tossing out passive-aggressive lines about how only selfish people need lawyers and how I was tearing the family apart. I didn't even meet his gaze, just glanced over to my car's dashboard, where the dashcam was mounted, recording everything. He looked, followed my eyes, and went silent. Without another word, he turned and walked away. In the weeks leading up to the court hearing, Brittany went into full-on damage control mode. Classic love bombing, lavishing the kids with gifts, surprise amusement park trips, staying out on school nights, buying junk food and electronics, like she was running a campaign for their affection. She wanted to show the judge that her house was the fun one. I didn't say a word to the kids about it. I documented everything, quietly, thoroughly. Meanwhile, I kept our home stable. Homework came first. Chores were consistent. Meals were home-cooked. Bedtime stayed the same. It wasn't flashy parenting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. My lawyer prepared me for court. They're going to frame you as controlling and bitter, she warned. Don't react. Don't rise to it. Let the mountain of evidence do the talking. And that's exactly what I did. 6 weeks later, standing before the judge, I laid everything out. Organized, indisputable. Every manipulative message, every attempt to guilt-trip me into paying for children that weren't mine. Recordings of conversations at pickups, texts between me and Declan, including the one where Derek said they were stuck with my kids. I handed over school records, receipts, testimony from teachers and coaches, video clips from my dashcam, and a folder of annotated communications. Brittany's lawyer looked pale. Derek kept fidgeting. The judge, unimpressed, leaned forward and asked, "Is there any evidence that Mr. Ellis has failed to care for his own children?" There was silence. After a long pause, the judge looked directly at Brittany and Derek. "Mr. Ellis has no legal or moral obligation to support your other children. This court views the repeated attempts to pressure him into doing so as inappropriate and coercive." He continued sternly, "The threats of withholding custody and the coordinated efforts to alienate the father from his children are concerning. I was granted 70/30 custody, court-monitored communication only, and a full order of financial independence. Official recognition that I owed them nothing. No rent support, no summer camp payments for Lyra, no blended family subsidies. Oh, and one more thing. They were ordered to reimburse me for legal expenses. Every cent of the $14,380. 0 cents. I walked out of that courtroom, not feeling victorious, but vindicated, like I'd finally taken the pen out of their hands and started writing my own story again. Soon after, I found a modest house closer to the STEM Academy. Nothing huge, just ours. Functional, peaceful. I gave each kid their own space, and on day one we built out a tech room. Dual monitors, custom-built gaming rigs, LED lights everywhere. That night we ordered pizza, tossed sleeping bags on the floor, and played Minecraft until we were all too tired to keep our eyes open. It was the happiest I'd felt in years. From that day on, everything went through the parenting app. No more surprise texts, no fake emergencies, no guilt-laced monologues. Brittany hated it. I didn't care. Everything was time-stamped and archived. The difference in the kids? Night and day. Declan was relaxed, more open. Zara became more affectionate, giggly again. One night, while brushing her teeth, she looked up at me in the mirror and asked, "Is it okay to be happy here?" I crouched beside her, brushing a bit of toothpaste from her chin. "Of course it is, sweetheart. You should always feel safe and happy at home." While they unpacked, I sent the legal bill to Brittany and Derek via courier. A crisp invoice for $14,380.00 with a short note attached. "My commitment is to my kids, not your lifestyle." Petty? Maybe. Necessary? Absolutely. Declan and Zara ended up crushing the tech camp, so much so, they were invited back as junior mentors the following summer. I sent the invitation to Brittany through the parenting app. No extra words, no commentary, just the facts. 6 months later, peace had returned to our lives. Declan got accepted into an elite coding academy at just 13. Zara's robotics team qualified for nationals. And me? I finally found my footing again. I started seeing someone new. She's a teacher. Smart, grounded, compassionate, with zero tolerance for drama. Our first date felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. We talked about books, travel, and childhood dreams. Not once did the words custody or conflict come up. But the moment that truly made everything worth it came late one evening. I was sitting beside Declan as we coded side by side, tinkering with a new game mod. He looked up out of the blue and said, "Dad, I'm glad you stood up to Mom and Derek. It was getting weird before." That's when I knew. I'd done the right thing. For him, for Zara, for myself. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. And no one's draining me ever again.